We're going to be talking about Simply CREST, one of the ways you can get support for doing CREST if you're in a school in challenging circumstances. My name's Susan. I'm in the education team at the British Science Association, and you're in the right place if you'd like to hear about Simply CREST. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We are recording this webinar, so for teachers who registered but were unable to attend, they'll be sent a recording of the session. You are very welcome to ask questions throughout. You can use the chat facility, and my colleague Karis, who you can also see on screen, will be able to answer those questions as we go along, but there'll also be an opportunity at the end of the session to ask any other questions or have a bit of a discussion. We know you're busy, so we're going to keep this to under 30 minutes. We are also available, however, to stay on a little bit later afterwards if you have some more questions or want to have a chat. If your questions come to you after you've left the session, help is always available at crest@thebritishscienceassociation.org, so feel free to drop us a line anytime. So, you're a member of the Engage Teacher Network, and we're delighted to have you in that community. There are two ways that we offer funding to support schools in challenging circumstances to run CREST with young people who are underrepresented in STEM. And those are the Engage grants, which if you've been aware of us for a while, were formerly known as the CREST URA grants, URA for underrepresented audiences. And this year, this academic year, we're trying something new and have introduced Engage Simply CREST. So we'll touch a little bit on what the grants are, because it's helpful to compare and contrast them, but this session is primarily about Simply CREST. I do want to stop and point out in particular that the funding is available for schools meeting certain criteria, which we'll talk about, and we specifically want to know that you're working with and supporting groups that are likely to be underrepresented in STEM. And we'll break that down a little bit more about what that means. So first of all, just touching on what the CREST Awards are, if you're not that familiar with CREST. CREST Awards is the British Science Association's flagship education program, which inspires young people to think and behave like scientists and engineers. CREST is characterized by open-ended project activities across 5 levels. So from STAR, which is for young people as little as 3, but normally 5 to 7, right up to Gold, which is typically done by young people who are doing A-levels or the equivalent. We have a vast number of free resources available on the website. CREST projects are designed to be flexible and adaptable, so you can use those resources, or you can come up with your own project ideas, and young people, particularly in the older years, often do. And it's a non-competitive program, so although there's a award in the name, it's not pegging young people against one another or looking for the best. It's about rewarding every student who completes the CREST Award with a high-quality certificate that celebrates their effort, and that's a really important part of CREST. The funding that's available for CREST can be represented in this way really helpfully. So the Engage grant is what you might normally think of as a typical grant. It is some money. It is £350 this year for your school. In addition to that, you get a voucher, and that voucher is worth up to £350, and that can be used to pay the CREST Award fees. So while the CREST resources are all entirely free, when it comes to claim your certificate or submit your CREST Award for assessment, which is something that happens for Gold and Silver, then there is a fee associated with CREST. And those CREST Award fees are thus paid by the voucher that you get with the Engage grant. And that's up to £350 if you're awarded the Engage grant. Now, Simply CREST is just the voucher. So there's no cash grant. What you get instead is up to £350 of CREST Awards for free. So both of these forms of support require an application. The Engage Simply CREST application is a little bit simpler, but basically what we ask you to tell us a little bit about your plans and your situation at your school, and then we base those decisions on that information. For the Engage grant application, you would have to tell us more about how you intend to spend that money. But just to be clear, with Engage Grant, you get a cash amount plus a voucher. The Engage Simply CREST is just the voucher. So that might lead you to ask, who is this for? The Simply CREST is available exclusively to members of the Engage Teacher Network. Like all Engage funding, it's directed at schools in challenging circumstances. And there's some criteria that help us define if you're a school in challenging circumstances, and I'll cover that. It's for young people or schools and teachers working with young people who are most likely to be underrepresented in STEM. That's girls, that's young people from ethnic minority backgrounds, young people who are eligible for pupil premium, free school meals, or the equivalent, young people with special educational needs and disabilities. It may also be in your context some other group that is underrepresented. So you may live in an area where you have a lot of service families, or perhaps you have a lot of young people in your classes who are in care. You can tell us about those different circumstances, but these are our basic target groups that will look at eligibility and how you're working with those groups. Now, because this doesn't come with a cash grant, we imagine that the schools most interested in Simply CREST will be those that perhaps already have sufficient kit and materials to run the CREST activities. So if you don't have any of those sorts of resources, or if you need money for teacher cover, for example, then the Engage grant is probably better for you. But if you've got the kit to get going, perhaps you're doing CREST with a relatively small group. So a small after school club, or maybe a group of older students who are just going to do silver or gold, such that you don't need a cash injection, and simply covering the cost of the CREST fees is your priority. Also, if you've been receiving support from an Engage grant in the past, particularly multiple grants in the past, we would strongly encourage you to consider Engage Simply CREST instead, because we do take into consideration when we're assessing and allocating grants what previous support a school has received. So if you've had the opportunity to invest in a lot of kit in previous years, having received Engage grants before, we'd like to see you be able to move on to using support that is particularly for CREST rather than an investment in more kit. So this is sort of why we're making Simply CREST available, because the Engage grant may not be for every context. And of course, there is a limited amount of grants to go around, and we'd like to be able to spread that support to as many schools as we possibly can. So how does it work? You'll need to plan your CREST activities to a degree. So think about what kind of groups are you going to work with, what age group, are you going to do something in the curriculum time, in lesson time? Are you thinking about doing some project activity on a drop-down day, perhaps during British Science Week? So you need to sort of think about what your CREST activities are going to be. Then you can tell us a little bit about your plans in an application for Simply CREST. And that application window is open now. Opened on the 7th of January, and until 5 o'clock on the 4th of February, you can apply for this support. Simply CREST and the Engage grants this year were available twice a year, in the autumn and now in the spring. That has been the pattern, but every year we'll tell you whether that continues to be the case. So this is your second opportunity and last opportunity for this academic year to apply for Simply CREST. We'll then assess the applications, and we'll tell you the outcome of your application by early March. So we'll try to do that within about a month, and you'll know as quickly as possible, and we can give you that voucher straight away if you're successful in your application. Then you go ahead and you run your CREST awards. So you get underway, what your plans were, you start to do that with your students. Near the end of that process, we'll ask you to fill out an evaluation form to tell us how it went, what your students thought of it, what we can learn, and that just helps us evaluate the program, particularly because this is the first year that we've offered Simply CREST. So it'd be really helpful if you share your thoughts with us, even about the grant application program, so that we can learn from that. When you're coming to the end of running your CREST awards, you're going to want to think about submitting. And all that means is that the project activity that you undertake with young people, then you upload on our online portal in order to get the certificates. And for the older years, if you're submitting work to be assessed by our expert assessors, and that happens at silver and gold level, so that we then have time to do those assessments. And that finishes the process, gives you those marvelous certificates to share with your young people. And often schools tell us about great celebrations they have where they hand those out and reward all the young people who've done the project work with a CREST certificate. The voucher needs to be used by the 31st of July if you're going to use it. So submitting for those CREST awards needs to happen in the same academic year in order to use that voucher that you've been given for Simply CREST. And another thing we'd like to let you know about is certificates can take up to 4 weeks to arrive after submission. So we encourage you, if you can, to order those early. And that's possible if you're doing a star, superstar, or discovery. So for example, if you were doing a CREST discovery drop-down day, which we hear about all the time, maybe you're doing that relatively late in the academic year, you might be doing that in June, you can order those certificates, enter the information about the young people who are likely to be taking part well in advance, so that you get the certificates on the day, that at the end of the day, you celebrate what you've done in your groups for your discovery activity, and you can give the certificates out straight away. Just something to be mindful of, that there's a processing time for the certificates. The younger age group, star, superstar, and discovery, we don't print the names on them anyway, so you'll get a blank certificate and you can fill those out for the young people involved. There'll also be an opportunity near the end of the academic year to chat with an external evaluator that helps us evaluate the program. And there's usually a little incentive for you to do that. So sometimes there's a voucher for you as a teacher to spend that 20 minutes or so on the phone or on a Zoom call with our evaluator. So if we pause for a second to have a quick look at applying for Simply CREST. We talk about the ABCs about application. So first, are you eligible? Most important thing to check before you even get started is checking the eligibility criteria. And we'll go over that in a minute or two. Second, please think carefully about the British Science Association priorities and whether or not your plans fit those priorities, because that's how we'll be judging your application. There are particular priorities, which I'll cover in a moment, that things that we want to fund, the kind of work that we're most interested in supporting. You can tell us about your plans and how they meet those criteria. And then finally, just clear and credible plans. So being as concise and clear about what you have planned is really helpful. It just makes your application easier to assess and compare against others. So if we think first about that eligibility, the A, are you eligible? First of all, Engage funding is only available for school settings. So that includes schools, colleges, Ofsted registered early years settings, such as nurseries and preschools. It's not available if you're not a school setting. The school must also meet the following eligibility criteria. Must be in England, Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland. The school needs to be state funded. Only independent schools that receive independent special schools that receive local authority funding for pupil places are eligible. Other independent or private schools are not. The school cannot be academically selective. And the school must also meet at least one of the following additional eligibility criteria. And these are the criteria when I mentioned the term schools in challenging circumstances. So that a minimum of students at the school are eligible for pupil premium, free school meals, or the equivalent, or a minimum of 30% of pupils are from ethnic minority backgrounds at your school, or the school is in a remote and rural location, and that can be looked up on a website. So that's the A, are you eligible? B, moving on to British Science Association priorities, we will prioritize funding schools whose activities or engagement demonstrates a commitment to the following. First of all, working with young people that are underrepresented in STEM. So these are young people eligible for pupil premium, from ethnic minority backgrounds, or with special educational needs or disabilities. So not only does your school in order to be eligible for the funding, need to have certain percentages of young people eligible, but also that the young people who are going to be involved in the CREST activities that you're proposing meet those groups. So if you have a STEM club, for example, that doesn't include those groups, we are going to be less likely to fund that. So we need to see, and for you to demonstrate your commitment that those young people within your school are those that are going to be involved and supported to take part in CREST. Girls are another underrepresented group. I'm also interested in you being able to use CREST as an opportunity to engage young people who might have lower prior attainment or that might not see science as for them, so might not choose to participate in STEM activities if given the option. We love to see CREST activities that are cross-curricular, that sort of broaden what science is, and particularly working with departments or other subject areas outside of STEM. So art, history, music, that kind of thing, drama sometimes. Because we're specifically hoping that you're engaging young people who might not usually be choosing science or that are underrepresented in STEM, activities that take in the whole class or whole youth groups are obviously something we're looking for as well as wanting to hear about how you're supporting those young people to take part fully in those activities. We also love to hear about engagement outside of the traditional type of science context, like science lessons or a STEM club. So what else are you doing in new and different ways that are really inspiring and bringing science to young people? And just a little note that we don't expect you to meet all of the criteria, and we would rather you explain in more depth how you're meeting a couple of them or a small number of them than just gloss over all of them in less detail. And I think if you're thinking about submitting an application, it's really important to think carefully about how you're demonstrating each of these things or the ones that you are demonstrating. So not just the intent, the intent is to involve young people in the STEM club who are underrepresented in STEM. How are you going to do that? How are you going to ensure that the young people are those that you prioritize to be involved in that STEM club? Right. One thing I would also encourage you to look at if you're interested in either of the funding, Engage Simply CREST or Engage Grants, is the website has some FAQ. So it's tricky for me to cover everything in the short amount of time we have, but some previous applicants and some previous webinars have flushed out some common questions that we've tried to capture in our FAQ about maybe how you get involved with CREST, how you should decide whether Simply CREST or Engage CREST might be best for you. The Engage Grant might be best for you. So please do, I encourage you to take a look at the FAQ. That's available online. And that brings me to the end of the details that I've planned for this session. But I'd really like to just open the floor to you and see if you've got any questions about Simply CREST. You can unmute yourself if you like, or pop something in the chat. I should also say, while you might be having a bit of a think, that there is another session later this week on Thursday, where we'll be talking about the Engage grant application process in a bit more detail. So for the most part, the application, the eligibility, the priorities for Simply CREST and the Engage grant are almost entirely the same. It's just a slightly simpler application for Simply CREST because we don't really require any financial information because we're not making a cash payment. Thank you, Karis, for sharing that in the chat. Sharing the slides. Yep, we can send you the slides, absolutely, as well as the recording. Also for your information, if you weren't able to attend, there were 2 sessions last week, just as introductions to CREST. So if you're still fairly new to CREST and you feel like you could do with a bit more information about what the CREST Awards are all about, there's a primary and a secondary version that we can share as well.
How can we access those 2 presentations you've just mentioned?
Karis, I'll let you jump in.
I will just put some links to the recordings in the chat, and I'll see if I can get you the links to the slides as well and put them in the chat here.
Super, thank you.
Thanks. I'm sorry for being quiet. I think I need to see the first presentations first, and then this will click.
No trouble at all.
I've done it the wrong way round.
One thing I sort of implied, but perhaps didn't say clearly enough, is that you can apply for both Simply CREST and the Engage grant, but you won't receive both. So if you thought, well, I don't know whether, you know, I want to do CREST, I need some help doing CREST. If you rely on having the cash funding, you couldn't do it without it, then I would say apply for the Engage grant. But it's more important that you get some support for the fees. And that might be something you decide by considering how many young people you're going to involve and what level of CREST you're doing. So just as an example, Star and Superstar are £1 per pupil. So if you're planning to do CREST with a small class of 20 young people, you're doing Star, then the cost of the CREST fees, if you like, isn't massively significant. The cost of Bronze, for example, which might be done with GCSE level students, sort of 14 to 16, is £6 per pupil. If you were doing a year group of 100 students at £6, you start to see that the cost of the CREST fees can vary quite considerably. So do have a think about what sort of support is most appropriate for you and what you're trying to do, what number of students you're working with, and what level of CREST you've got your eye on. And you are welcome to apply for both, but you won't receive both. If by chance any of you in the room already received a Kickstart grant, so Kickstart grant is another grant available from the British Science Association for British Science Week, you already have a voucher for free CREST. Just mentioning that because you might not be aware of that.
Sorry for being silent. I need to, as I said, I need to see the first presentations and then link back to this one. So I will have loads of questions once I've seen the first presentation.
No trouble at all. You can contact us anytime. It doesn't have to be in the moment. You can go away and digest some of that and have a think. And we'll stay on if you have any questions. Equally, if you want to go away and look at some of the links we've provided and previous sessions, you can get in touch with us at the CREST email, crest@britishscienceassociation.org.